And welcome to the latest and greatest from Sabrehood, sports part of the Hockey Podcast Network and the Bills Mafia Buffalo fan base platform. We are brought to you by Rich Brow Brewing, located at 5 South 20th Street, Richmond's premier Buffalo Bills backers bar. Don't forget to subscribe to our socials on all our platforms at CFMAZ for me or SV the Don NHL, and also on YouTube at Stepbrother Sports. Don't forget to like the video, rate, review, all the great things you can do for engagement for us. We appreciate it. But today, Buffalo sports fans might want to buckle up because it's been a big few days in Western New York. Maybe the best regular season Sabres game of all time was played this past Sunday. The Bills front office finally stopped wasting time making moves in free agency. But first, they go out and add a playmaking defensive end and defensive back, D. Alford, a guy known for speed, coverage ability, versatility in the secondary. Maybe that new nickel corner after Taron Johnson left. That alone would have gotten Bills Mafia a little bit excited. But then a big bombshell today: Bradley Chubb, a former Miami Dolphin, on a 3-year deal coming into the Bills, adding some juice to that defensive front. They're a good edge rusher here. But again, the Bills are making noise in the offseason. Sabres are doing their talking on the ice, of course. Blue and gold are a freaking wagon rolling right now, riding an 8-game winning streak right off that Olympic break, scoring goals in bunches, playing fast, confident hockey, and suddenly looking like one of the hottest teams in the league. We never thought we'd be saying this, and we are so happy we're saying it now. So Buffalo sports vibes, probably pretty damn good. Some might say immaculate. So with all that happening, we had to bring back one of our favorite returning guests to break it all down, especially for a lot of these Sabres trade deadline acquisitions that we got. You know her from Sports Talk Winnipeg and the always entertaining Chell Chit Chat, helping to grow the game even more. And she's one of our go-to voices when we want some real insight, great perspective, and a whole lot of hockey talk. So please welcome back to the show, Lyss Houde.
Oh, wow. We get claps now. Exciting.
Yes.
Yeah. We've made some improvements since last time.
So, Lyss, welcome back. We appreciate you taking the time as always. Got a lot of hockey to get into today, so let's get right to it. But first off, obviously, wellness check, of course. What's new and exciting on your end?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking ahead to April. It's been a weird week because, 8-9 days ago, I would have said, my April plans not going to be too busy in about 16 games from now or whatever you want to call it. But then Jets decided to go on a little bit of a tear kind of coming out of the Olympic break, picking up points in pretty much every single game. And then just last night here in Winnipeg, laid a big fat egg to quote Scott Arniel against the Anaheim Ducks. So it's looking like my spring is probably going to be a little bit more chill than in the previous years. So vibes are not the best here in Winnipeg in terms of how things are going with the hockey team, but I love the game more than I love anything else. And there's always a lot to talk about when it comes to the Winnipeg Jets. So I'm happy as a clam as always.
Love to hear that as always. So obviously our biggest reason was because for having you on is, like we said, the newest Sabres, 3 out of the 4 of them at the trade deadline came from your neck of the woods. And off camera, you were just talking to us about one of your most talked about players for the last decade being Mr. Logan Stanley. So, Sean, take this one away.
Yeah, Liz. So, one of the more interesting developments for the Sabres, it's clearly been by new GM Jarmo Kekalainen an effort to inject a little bit more, I guess we call it, some snarl and physical presence into the lineup, specifically with the additions of veteran defensemen, both Logan Stanley and Luke Schenn, both coming over from your Winnipeg Jets. So Sabres fans have been clamoring for a bit more edge and pushback, especially on the blue line, but especially when it comes to protecting some of the younger skill-type players that the Sabres seem to have a lot of in spades, and trying to establish a tougher identity. From your perspective, actually on a nightly basis, covering these Jets, seeing the guys close up, what should the Sabres fans realistically expect from both Stanley and Schenn, not just in terms of maybe on-ice physicality, which we've already seen a glimpse of last night, and defensive play, but also at a championship level intangibles, obviously in the form of Schenn. How do you see them as far as an impact in the locker room? What type of personalities will they have to kind of incorporate into the team? Do you see them ultimately fitting into Buffalo and what they're building with this more young, kind of at one point kind of a perimeter team, but the players that are at the core, they seem to be a little bit, I guess, the missing pieces of what fans have been looking for?
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways that I can sort of take this. And so I'll kind of focus in on this specific sort of snarl area to start and talk about that kind of component of these players, where I want the first thing I say about Logan Stanley and Luke Schenn to be that I think championships are won more often, because of the higher end players than they are because of guys deeper in the lineup. I'm never going to say that a team has won a Stanley Cup because of their third pairing defenseman or their fourth line center, but I will. And so for that same reason, I'll never say that they lost a Stanley Cup because of their third line, their third pairing defenseman or their fourth line center. So I think that ultimately whoever you bring into those roles shouldn't move the needle all that much, but it's really interesting to see kind of where Buffalo is at. And again, same thing as I was saying about the Winnipeg Jets. Like, I feel like my temperature check on them has changed a little bit kind of over the past few weeks and here and there and everywhere. And if this was the Buffalo Sabres of a few weeks ago, pre-Olympic break sort of thing, I think I'd really like this acquisition from that snarl perspective, where I remember earlier this season, I can't remember who it was on the team, kind of got taken down, got a check, whatever, and something that looked a little bit dirty, and every single player on the ice just kind of stood and watched and kind of just sat there. And that doesn't really happen in those band of brothers teams, if you will, kind of thing. So bringing in someone who isn't going to win or lose you the game, but is going to be the one who's going to, either if he's on the ice, go after that guy immediately or come on the next shift and try and fight someone. I think those are the types of moves that make a lot of sense when you're missing that. And I think that it makes sense when you have a young team like Buffalo, and this is where I'm getting to the point of, I felt a little differently about them a few weeks ago, where if this isn't your year and you're kind of on the cusp of coming into perhaps a bit of a window and stuff like that, bringing in these guys on expiring deals to kind of prove to your team as a management side that you care about them, that you believe in them, and that you want them to fight for one another, and kind of bringing that culture into your locker room, I think makes a lot of sense. We see it happen with, maybe some of the Montreal Canadiens moves from last year and stuff like that, where you're trying to show this group that you're invested in them, and maybe this isn't the year for them, but you believe in their ability to make it into the playoffs this year, get some experience, and bring in some guys who are going to help with that. Where we're at right now, like Buffalo's on such a heater right now that maybe, those Parayko-esque moves that were rumored around them, days before the actual transaction, those longer term moves maybe ultimately, would have been the better route to go and all that. But Logan Stanley is a guy who was at risk with the Winnipeg Jets of getting, signed to a pretty long-term deal, which I don't think was the right move for them, and I don't think it'll be the right move for Buffalo. But for a year to try and maybe get some playoff wins under your belt, and that drought that's been plaguing the city for so long, bringing in some guys who are going to bring some of that, aggression, the physicality, whatever you want to call it, those intangibles and stuff like that to the lineup, I think is probably not a bad decision.
Absolutely. No, and like I said, we've already seen it. I don't know if you saw the game yesterday, but Logan Stanley endearing. Yeah,
Logan Stanley got in a fight. Nikolai Ehlers got hurt and played his next shift. We're like, the Winnipeg Jets outside of Winnipeg are still the Winnipeg Jets.
Right. And I mentioned, and I think this so far, and I think it's just because of a lack of exposure, seems to be the forgotten man currently, maybe on the outside looking in for a roster spot. So far. I know there's been some issues with immigration, but what can you tell us about Tanner Pearson and his recent play this season?
Yeah, Tanner Pearson's a guy who is also a little bit on the outside looking in for this Winnipeg Jets group. He was the 13th forward quite a few times over the course of the game. He only played here this season. So Logan Stanley has been here his whole career, 10 years. Luke Schenn and Tanner Pearson have a lot less, reps under their belt with the Winnipeg Jets hockey club. So I don't have the same kind of bigger picture perspective on them as I feel as though I do with Logan. But Tanner Pearson, I think some of his best hockey has been played in 2026 that we've seen for him in a Winnipeg Jets jersey. To start off the year, I struggled seeing that player get as much ice time as he was getting, just in terms of just the general output in terms of the forechecking, because he was playing a lot on the fourth line for the Winnipeg Jets, and he doesn't have that same tenacious speed that you sometimes want from that energy line and stuff like that. So role is going to be important, but he's that guy who has all that experience that people always want to bring in. And at the end of the day, 7th round pick, like this was a guy that probably was brought in more for off ice purposes than on ice purposes. But he'll come in and he gives you a pretty consistent game, I would say, for the most part. Is that game something that's going to add to the Buffalo Sabres? I don't know, but you can count on, this player. There's a little bit more stability there to bring him in, as opposed to something perhaps a bit more unproven for a game or two if need be, if injury arises, stuff like that. But honestly, not a whole ton to say about Tanner Pearson, even though I've watched a good half season of him here in Winnipeg. Pretty insignificant in terms of the impact I think that it'll have in the long term for the next couple of months for Buffalo.
Gotcha. And two quick follow-ups to that. Don't know if you have had exposure to this guy, but do you have any thoughts about the center they picked up from the Rangers, Carrick?
Yeah, not a ton. Kind of same thing where he fits the bill, in my opinion, of that really shouldn't be the guy you're counting on to win your games or to lose your games or anything like that. But I do think that he's known for a little bit more of that defensive conscience that you don't see in as many of the higher impact players in the Buffalo Sabres. So perhaps there's a bit of kind of that internal coaching, some of that mindset stuff that he can bring to the group. All in all, I was hoping to see Buffalo make some higher end moves than what we ended up seeing. But, lots of people think that Logan Stanley can do more than he does. I consider him to be a third-party defenseman. Right. That's not necessarily how everyone views him. But, ultimately my thoughts on Sam Carrick are also pretty limited. Definitely more I have to say on Tanner Pearson than Sam Carrick. But he's a guy. And I say that about a lot of players in the National Hockey League when sometimes I think I'm bad for this, where I dive into the minutia of guys who play 9 minutes a night for the Winnipeg Jets. It's like, man, that's a guy. You don't need to always give it too much more than that. But hey, we
Jag, if you will, just a guy.
Right.
Jag,
right.
Yes. Oh, yes. But what we're here to do is, blow all this out of proportion, so we can definitely dive into all of it more than is perhaps the reflective truth of how it'll turn out impact-wise.
Of course. Now, even just kind of talking about the return for what the Winnipeg Jets received, two names that are obviously been part of the Sabres vernacular for quite some time. Isak Rosén was the draft pick that was acquired in the Rasmus Ristolainen trade back in 2021. Obviously, Rosén, he's been mostly an AHL guy, but he's had some stints with the Sabres where he's had some opportunities. He showed off well, especially this season. He had, I think, a 2-goal game earlier on in the fall against Washington. He showed out pretty well. But just the hardest thing was the Sabres just had a lot of other high-end prospects, also first-round draft picks, very similar skill sets. Not the biggest build, of course, too. But right. I think Rosén getting this opportunity with the Jets to kind of inject some youth into your roster, I think that could be beneficial for the team. But I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this, Lyss. And how do you think he will be integrated into the team this season and beyond?
Yeah, I was really, really excited about this return. The way I looked at it was I really wanted the Winnipeg Jets to make transactions at the deadline here that involved more than one player getting shipped out, just because all the individuals that were either expiring as pending UFAs, guys like Stanley, guys like Shen, and then the other players, maybe the Nino Niederreiters, Vladimir Meskovs of the world that have that extra year. None of them are really going to get those high impact pieces that the Winnipeg Jets needed. So I was really hoping to see some packages coming out of Winnipeg. I would have liked to have seen more packages, but this one made a lot of sense. I didn't think that any one asset in the Winnipeg Jets organization was worth the equivalent of a first round pick necessarily. So putting some stuff together to get back, the second, fourth, whatever that you traded for Luke Shen last year, and to get, Jacob Bryson, also an expiring UFA. So I don't know. I don't have a whole ton of thoughts on that one. I think that he might fall into the category of, any day you get to stay in the league is a good day, and maybe sign an extra year here, something like that. It's a pretty common Winnipeg Jets move to do. But on the Isak Rosén front, I was really excited about that because the Winnipeg Jets in the last 8 years, since the Logan Stanley draft, I guess, if you want to go that far, 10 years ago, they've had one first round draft pick. It's actually developed into an NHL regular. So the Winnipeg Jets haven't been drafting a whole ton of high end prospects. And kind of the joke when Isak Rosén's name was first floated in and around this return was that he has more goals than pretty much every high-end Winnipeg Jets prospect does in the AHL combined this year. Braden Yager, Colby Barlow, Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, all these players. Isak Rosén alone has more goals than all of them combined. So I was really hoping that the Winnipeg Jets would find a way to bring in a prospect or someone under the age of 23 in the return for any of their pending UFAs this year, just because they don't have a lot of them in the organization right now. And also the team is a little bit too stubborn and has too many core pieces locked up to ever actually go into this rebuild phase that people might want them to right now. So bringing in guys who can contribute to your lineup a little bit more, a little bit sooner than perhaps the 17-year-old right now who's going to be drafted in June I think is huge. So overall, I'm really pleased with the return from Kevin Cheveldayoff. I think it makes a ton of sense. And then there's also the other side of it, saves the Winnipeg Jets left side of the blue line from a potential impending Logan Stanley extension as well.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Another pickup that the Jets had as part of the trade. Obviously, the Sabres sent, I believe, was a 2027 second rounder their way, but also longtime depth defenseman Jacob Bryson. Now, sometimes
Chris's favorite.
We'll admit he was the butt end of a lot of our jokes.
What you call him?
I used to call him just because he just was forever on the roster. I mean, I'll admit I was a little bit harsh, but I think his play has been much more endearing this year. I called him the cockroach because he would never go away. Because for a few years in a row, it was just like if you were trying to finish out a game, Bryson was always like lagging behind. He didn't have the speed or the physicality. Mind you, like as more formative years were coming for Bryson, as well as the rest of the team, as they went through a lot of growing pains, as many know, he was often like not as physical, not as fast, and for a lot of goals against, Bryson was on the ice for. But as time went on, like one, he became a more inexpensive player. Two, he knew the system a lot more. And three, like you can really count on him for a lot more reliability in that regard, because as much as, like, again, we wanted to joke about it for how much, like, even former GM Kevin Adams loved having him there, but and he was also, like, I guess, a glue guy in the locker room just based on the personality that he was. He was very charitable with the community and what he did for a lot of outside organizations. So a lot of really good things he did on and off the ice, of course. But still, what was thought as like a depth defenseman, like he ended up being reliable more often than not, because the Sabres blue line experienced a lot of injuries throughout the course of the year, and particularly with Michael Kesselring, Connor Timmins being out for a while, leading to Zach Metza from Rochester getting called up, and Bryson really like shoring up that third defensive pairing for a considerable amount of time. So as much as, like, again, I wanted to be critical of him in the past, like he was a pretty good chess piece to have, somebody who knew the system. And I think, honestly, again, could be beneficial to Winnipeg because, again, he's still on the youthful side. And defensemen typically and traditionally take a little bit longer to develop, too. But what are your thoughts on the Bryson acquisition after making his way to Winnipeg?
Yeah, I had to laugh at it a little bit. I can't lie to you, just because he's an undersized left-handed defenseman, and every undersized left-handed defenseman that's entered the Winnipeg Jets organization in the last 10 years has lost their roster spot to Logan Stanley. So I was like, hey, you know what? I guess he's gone. So maybe, someone else gets a crack at it. But, we see it with guys like Declan Chisholm, Billy Hanola, all these different players have kind of come through, and Logan Stanley's been a little bit more of a staple in the lineup just for all these different reasons, regardless of, what the turnovers look like, what the net front coverage looked like, and all this different stuff. It just seemed like there was a little bit more leash there for that player. I really don't know how this one's going to go. It seems like he's getting some reps in the lineup, but again, it's tough. You go into one of the more frustrating defensive environments in the National Hockey League right now. That was one of the best last year, playing the same system this year, and is somehow managed to climb their way into being one of the worst ones. You're playing on your offside. You're playing with Hayden Fleury. You're, probably going out there for, D-zone starts with Gustav Nyquist and Jonathan Taves. Like, it's not necessarily the most captivating environment for a player to come in he's a Buffalo Sabres draft pick, correct?
Yes, he was a second rounder.
Played his full year, his full career with the same organization. So your first time ever switching pro organizations, like there's just, I don't know how strong of a recipe for success it is, and how much of this player's best we're going to see. I'm not saying that to try and, defend the undersized left-handed defenseman, which is something I'm known for doing. But I'm just wondering, how many minutes, how many games, how meaningful the games are going to be for the Winnipeg Jets on the stretch here. That's why I think that it's very much in the Winnipeg Jets' nature to sign another kind of 1-year extension for this player, just if they actually genuinely wanted him, and as opposed to just filling a roster spot so Billy Handel wouldn't have to play. If they actually saw something in this player that they're relatively interested in, I think they'll extend him no matter what. But if it was just we need bodies because we're shipping out 2 defensemen, so we need someone to play on the blue line, we'll see. But hey, he got into the lineup right away, and they've given him a couple cracks, so we'll see how the next couple weeks go.
Nice. Just two quick thoughts I had just to kind of mention. So, to be fair, as Chris Maz mentioned, he definitely, I think over the last 80 games or so, dating back to like last season when he was in games, and he's never really been a full-time guy. He did show well. I think you could probably do worse than having Bryson be like your sixth or definitely like your seventh defenseman. He has a lot of NHL experience with the Sabres at a time where we just didn't have any other better options, quite frankly. And they've really strengthened their blue line, obviously, in the last season or two. But we just can never figure out why he somehow kept getting multi-year contracts. That's the thing that we were like, we just didn't see it. But as far as Rosen goes, there is a clip that Winnipeg Jets fans want to check out. When they drafted him with that 13th overall pick in that draft, I believe it was Chris mentioned the draft earlier. There's a video of their scouting staff really like singing his praises about how fast he could scoot. He's just a really high-end skater with a lot of finishing ability and playmaking ability coming over from Sweden. And I believe he's led the Amherst like 3 years in a row in scoring. And this season, he actually came up and was like quite productive at the NHL level, filling in, maybe outshined a little bit by Noah Ostlund for sure. But I really do think it's just it's a point of he needs an opportunity to really get some NHL playing times. I think you're going to be pretty happy with him. But just kind of moving on, I did want to ask you, I know you alluded to it just for a quick second about like the deadline overall and maybe some other moves. It was actually reported today by Darren Drager. I know there was some smoke about Robert Thomas from the Blues potentially St. Louis being in talks with the Sabres. And Drager came out today saying that it might have been up to 4 big pieces required. And you get it. I mean, Robert Thomas is a 26-year-old undoubted top-line center. So you're not going to try to sell, low on him. You're just going to try to get a nice package back that you're not going to be like completely resetting. But it was reported that GM Jarmo Kekalainen wasn't willing to include Josh Norris in that deal. If you ask me, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, Liz and Chris. I mean, if Norris being maybe the centerpiece going back the other way, about the same age, obviously with the injury history that he's had, although healthy now, that seems like it might have been a little rich with Norris and 3 other like significant pieces. But what would you think about that if that's true, what Drager's saying? And do you think it might be something that the Sabres and Blues could revisit in the offseason?
Yeah, it's a good question and a good thought, because you're totally right by talking about how that door's not necessarily closed. It's not like he went anywhere else. It's not like he was a pending UFA, whatever. But I think that I like the fit for a lot of different reasons. But I think the main reason is that I like Robert Thomas and I like the Buffalo Sabres. Like, I think that there's a lot to like about that player. And he's so proven at this point that he, to me, kind of falls into that category of like, you'd be hard pressed to, put together a package of futures that wouldn't end up being worth it to a certain degree. Josh Norris, with everything that he's gone through in his career, was the centerpiece, and everything else in that, package is a lower value than Josh Norris. I think the Sabres should definitely be picking up the phone to try and figure out if they can make that work. I don't know about you guys, but it's funny. I have one-sided beef with one of the players on your team. I have one-sided beef with Jack Quinn, and I was mortified that Jack Quinn was going to be part of this return when this first kind of came up and we had to wait an hour before finding out what the return was. If there was a way to loop both Josh Norris and Jack Quinn into that sort of thing, and then maybe a couple other like periphery pieces or something, I think that would be a fantastic play for Buffalo. I think that Jack Quinn's a guy that I don't see a lot in that player. I never really have.
His first ever.
First Hattie last night, but we're of a similar mindset.
Yeah.
He's
okay, good to know. Good to know. Right. Yeah,
we're of the same mindset.
Yeah, like he's a guy who I think, before you turn 26 years old, if you were a first round draft pick earlier in your career, you still have that kind of tag associated with your name and stuff. But when he was playing junior, I was shook to my core when he was drafted in the position that he was that year. And guys like, Marco Rossi, Cole Perfetti, Anton Lindell, they were all still kind of on the board. I was shaken by that. And you can tell I'm still jarred 6 years later to this day. So if there's a way that you can loop something like that into a deal to get Robert Thomas, like I think it would be really difficult to lose a Robert Thomas trade if you're able to complete it without getting rid of the likes of a Zach Benson, Tage Thompson, Noah Osselin, guys like that, the guys that I think have cemented themselves as being pretty core pieces for Buffalo going forward. I think it'd be really, really interesting to see if they could revisit that.
For sure. You gotta make the money
completely
work.
Go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I mean, I understand that to make the money work, it's almost an even swap. I think you actually even save about $1 million going from Norris to Thomas. But yeah,
the only thing with that though,
centers are hard to find. Maybe
right.
The only
thing with that though, Sean, is if Robert Thomas was part of any package, like that would ultimately mean like you're saying goodbye to Alex Tuch. Like they would not be able to fit him in unless he takes a significant hometown discount. Obviously, I mean. Not going to count any chickens before they hatch, of course, because, again, obviously the whole weight of 14 years on the franchise still. But if they make a decent playoff run, I could see Alex Tuch wanting to go for less than what is the rumored over 10.5 that's being seen for his potential salary for the years to come. And especially if he wants to be there long term, like for like the max value that he can get. But if Robert Thomas comes in, again, he's an $8 million plus player per year. I mean, that would be extremely difficult to get Alex Tuch on the books again, unless he got a bunch of money up front through signing bonus. And again, you could see the rising salary cap go over within the following years as well. I heard rumors, I think some speculation that it might even get up to over 130 million by the 27-28 season. So pretty interesting to see how it will play out. But I mean, again, if Thomas was to be brought back in a trade of any kind over the summer, I do think, again, that would ultimately mean saying goodbye to Alex Tuch.
No, well, I mean, there's a point to that, but I'm saying if the rumors are true, if you're sending Norris out, Norris actually makes more than Robert Thomas. I believe he's $1 million more. He's at like 9. So if that's the trade you're doing, that's about basically it's a wash moving forward because they're both long-term, deals that are on the books. My thing was this. So the rumors were, like Lyss mentioned, it was like Jack Quinn and another piece that we had heard might have been Owen Power. Do I love that trade? Like, as far as what I just mentioned, if we did like Jack Quinn and Norris and a couple of peripheral pieces, yes. Do I like Owen Power Norris plus? No, I don't like that. It's a little too much for my taste.
No, it's super fair. Like, I think that there are certain guys that you gotta have to look at the position that the team is in. And like that blue line right now, and I don't know if we want to chat more about the Logan Stanley piece or not, but I mean, talking about that blue line, like there are so many parts of it that I really, really like. And I'm sure you guys more than anyone are just so pleased with this whole Matthias Samuelsson, arc that has, emerged this last season and a bit here. You really don't want to mess with that top 4 group, in my opinion, that they kind of have going for them right now. And this is all with the best of Michael Kesselring, in my opinion, still yet to come. So I think it would be tough to part with a guy like Owen Power, who, I mean, has as much potential as he does and has shown, in my opinion, as well. He's a guy who I think people have been a little bit hard on. I think that that's a fantastic player. And, maybe I'm biting my tongue a little bit on the Robert Thomas side because, look, the one thing I will push back on is if, Alex Tuch is the hang up there in terms of making a push for Robert Thomas, like, enjoy July 1st, Alex Tuch. To me, that's almost a non-issue. Like, I think that the priority would then have to be on the Thomas front. But as soon as guys like, an Owen Power, I think that would be a really, really tough one to grapple with if you were a Sabres fan. And I don't think that you should want to, part ways with that player at this time.
No,
I would agree with that. Because if you are going to get, say, somebody like a Robert Thomas or another, insert your big name player here, like, yes, you have to give up something like that's going to make it hurt a little bit. But again, somebody like Owen Power in this case, and you could even argue to an extent Josh Norris, like that would hurt more than it should. I mean, obviously, again, you are getting quality production in return. I mean, and say what you will about his production for St. Louis this year. I mean, they're just a bad team roster just from head to toe. I'm not sure if it's like just a certain type of malaise that's over the organization or just like the culture of that team ever since their Stanley Cup. It just hasn't been the same. I mean, sure, they've been contenders here and there making playoff runs, but obviously the magic from that run they had back in 2019 is essentially gone. So, especially with the way Jordan Binnington played, not only in the Olympics, which we'll kind of transition to in just a moment, but just is really streaky play in general this year. But with that, obviously, we're not here to showboat on this because, needless to say, there were some questionable calls by what the United States did after the game had taken place. But we did want to hear your thoughts on the Olympics and Olympic play for hockey these past few weeks, Lyss, because obviously in a Canadian market, you're going to have a whole different perspective on this. Both the men's and women's tournament and also the NHL playoff race, really, like, they were, though, and obviously the NHL playoff race took like a big pause just because of the Olympics, but everybody was captivated on this. So the immediate takeaway, of course, is Canada's ultimately feeling disappointed again. This is not rubbing any salt in the wound by any means, of course, but still, what were the takeaways that Team Canada would really have from this, both from the men's and women's side on this? Because obviously when you're losing both of those in each league, like, that's a huge blow because, like, it's the national sport. I mean, you have elite players up and down the roster. I mean, and if you're looking at it, the game in a vacuum, especially looking at the men's, Canada dominated the U.S. The U.S. was very opportunistic. Yes, they had some physicality on their side, but Canada had every bit of firepower, even without Sidney Crosby rostered on that team. But what are your thoughts overall from the Olympic tournament, just based on how it went, and ultimately what it might mean going forward?
Yeah, the way I looked at it was the women's and men's tournament results were equally heartbreaking, but in very, very different ways. On the women's side, it was like one of those things where going into that final game, to be honest with you, I am a little bit of a pessimist at heart, but I didn't have a whole ton of hope going into that game, just based on how the rivalry series went between Canada and the U.S., the fact that Canada brought a pretty similar roster, the fact that they got smoked in the round robin, all this different stuff. You know, the U.S. was just head and shoulders a better hockey team on paper, in execution, every position, all these different things. And then the game itself happened, and all of a sudden I'm like, holy, like, maybe I have a little bit of hope here, and you gotta get built up just to get knocked right down kind of thing. Whereas it's like I was kind of braced for the pain going into the game, and then I wasn't when it got to that, you know, that closer to the end of the third period, and there's the, by God, they might do it. And then, you know, that tying goal is just absolute dagger to the heart. And then you kind of get knocked down. So it was like a weird, you know, you get built up just to get knocked back down. Whereas on the Canada side, it was like you stay up and you're there and you're so excited and you think that you have the better team that you're rooting for. And like you said, I got so much flack on the internet for saying that comment that I thought Canada was the better team. And everyone's like, well, who has the gold medal? And I'm like, hey guys, listen, when a game is decided by a single goal, like, there's a lot of other stuff that happens in between there. And, you know, I have all kinds of reasons why Canada ended up losing that game and why the U.S. ended up winning, obviously. But I thought that Canada played a pretty good game. So it was pretty heartbreaking to see that. It was never going to feel good for Canada to lose that in any regard. Like, even if they'd gotten, you know, the similar route of the women's where it's like, oh, they had gotten smoked and there was no hope or anything like that, like, that was still going to hurt. It was always going to hurt if Canada was going to lose gold to the U.S. for any capacity in men's or women's hockey. But it really did suck to watch them, you know, control as much of that game as they did, have great players, have great games. You know, I thought Celebrini was awesome. I thought McDavid was awesome. I thought that a lot of the players that they needed to play well did play well. I'm no stranger to Connor Hellebuyck legacy games. And, you know, there's just such a difference between that player when he's kind of dialed and then how calming of a presence he is. He gives up nothing on the secondary. You know, people give him flack for his puck handling, but it's quite strong when he's in the zone. There wasn't a lot kind of given up by him. And, you know, the US did a good job of making his life easy enough, but they didn't make it as easy as Canada made it for Jordan Binnington in that game, in my opinion. And he was lights out. So yeah, it was a tough one to stomach for sure. And I think that we're in an interesting time. I think Canada's in pretty good shape for kind of 4 years from now. I really, really like the core kind of group of guys that they have. Obviously, you know, McDavid isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But it's going to be really interesting to see what, you know, the Sidney Crosby route looks like for the next little bit, what the Marie-Philippe Poulin route looks like for the next little bit. Like, there's a lot of question marks. And I think Canada has a lot of high-end players that are going to be on their, you know, we have the Gavin McKenna's, the Landon DuPonts of the world kind of coming up down the stretch. But, you know, in 4 years, 8 years from now, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of group they ice, especially considering how sick some of the American players that are in their early 20s right now are.
Completely agree. And you cannot forget who I think had arguably one of the best tournaments was Macklin Celebrini. Like, the guy is electric every time he has the puck on his stick. I mean, he got
against us last night.
Yeah, he dazzled against the Sabres. Obviously, he got flattened too, which led to a little bit of a scrum afterwards. But still, like, he's going to be electric to watch all the way through. And I think San Jose, not to say they're lucky to have him, but I think he's really going to help that market and make it a very not only watchable product, but it'll still attract a lot of talent their way for the West. But yeah, really, thank you for that perspective on there, Lyss, of course, just because, again, international hockey can have so many different opinions and varying, like, just stakes for a lot of people. And again, here on the Canadian side of things, of course, especially, again, this is by no means a showboat of any kind, but still, like, it's always good to hear different perspectives on how the loss or the win for even the U.S., how it was handled. It's just, it's always appreciated to just hear instead of the same voices over and over.
For sure. And I wanted to ask you a question, Lyss, about like the women's tournament specifically. No, I actually did on a podcast. I did predict the double gold for the U.S. I don't think it's really a surprise that the U.S. women ended up winning because they were the favorite, and I think they had beat Canada previously in other tournaments and whatnot, or in other games head to head. But as far as the men go, I think we were like plus 120 or something, so we weren't the favorite. So a little surprising to see them both get it done. But specifically on the women's side, like I more than ever was sucked in by, I think, a lot of people in the world just watching everything. Curling, the other sport we always talk about with the skiing and the gun, the rifle. Like, there's just so much like cool stuff that I really like. Everyone seemed to be like just taking it all in. But the women's tournament, especially, I just felt like watching it in depth that it seems like the level of skill of all the countries seems to keep rising every cycle, every Olympics. And while obviously the men's tournament always brings, it has, at least this time, the fascinating blend of NHL star power, not every time, and national pride. But as a woman yourself in the hockey world, how great is it to see that level of play and with such even like close games, and especially in like the medal rounds? How nice is that to see just like the overall competitiveness?
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome, right? And I think the thing that I always say, and I never want it to be taken the wrong way by anyone, but it's the best of women's hockey is yet to come, because it's very difficult to, compare apples to apples when you look at the men's and the women's game, when, the men's game in this year's Olympics is mostly being played by men who, for the last X number of years of their life, depending on how old they are, their life has been 24/7 training for hockey. In the past, the women's game has been entertaining in its own right for years and years and years, but you're also having all these women who are going out there and playing, who have a lot of other jobs, who do all these different things because they can't train as full-time athletes because of the state of professional women's sport in North America. Something that I just has shaken me to my core that I don't know how I didn't even realize until I was having a great conversation with Diana Matheson, who founded the Canadian Women's Soccer League that started just this past year. She was on the Canadian women's team that, the Olympic team that won gold. She's been an Olympian multiple times with them, the Northern Super League. And she's like, yeah, like in Canada, 3 years ago, we didn't have any professional women's leagues. And, starting this year with the introduction of the Toronto Tempo and the WNBA, we're going to have 3. And we went from 0 to 3 in 3 years. Like, the emergence of professional women's sport is so fascinating. So now you're getting this product in this game where not necessarily all these athletes, but a lot of them, some of the younger ones, they're able to train full time and with the same level of kind of resources, intensity, all this different thing that we've seen in the men's athletes for so many years now. So I think we're on the horizon of seeing, an even bigger jump and leap in how amazing the women's game is, just because even some of the women that are playing there right now, they played in, the CWHL, the PHF before the PWHL, where they were also working other jobs and stuff like that. And it doesn't mean that they weren't training as hard, but you don't have the same level of kind of allocation of resource and how you're training for your sport when you have to, provide for your family in other ways. So it's just really cool to see because, the women's game has been on the Olympic stage for quite some time, but as the quality of men's hockey increases, the quality of other sports are, increasing as well. We see it with, the way the shooting game has changed in men's hockey and all this different stuff. We're seeing it on the women's side as well. And I think it's going to accelerate even more quickly. So it's pretty cool to see.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the peek into that as well. Again, just because the PWHL, it's great to see them getting more franchises and a lot of really big markets too. And just seeing that being able to grow the game, I think is pretty great. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think there was a game not too long ago where I think they played at the Garden. Did they sell it out? I think.
Yeah, I don't know if that already happened, or they announced just a few days ago that it was sold out. I don't know if it's a game that's coming up or if it's already happened. But yeah, TD Garden and Madison Square Garden, they both announced the sellouts the same day. So yeah, it was pretty cool. And then right after the Olympics, obviously, there was all that stuff about the women's team on the off ice side with the way everyone was kind of talking about it. And the response to that was they sold out Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle's first game back,
Nice.
which is pretty cool to see as well. So yeah, the investment in women's sport has gone pretty well in the last little bit. Lots of people are getting a bang for their buck because the fan investment is just increasing by the day.
Oh, for sure. Especially for those day one folks who just follow right away. Like they're immediately getting dividends from there. So
Absolutely.
Thanks for that. So let's shift gears over to the NHL as a whole for the moment. So looking at some current standings across the league, got some tight races shaping up pretty much every division. Atlantic being led by the Sabres on their current 8-game win streak. Metropolitan teams jockeying for some top positioning as well. But obviously just being led by Carolina currently, and they're still the top team in the East in general. But then you have the Central and the Pacific showing a mix of veteran clubs and some young squads battling for playoff spots. To me, the biggest surprise, I thought, say what you will about Joel Quenneville, but still the biggest surprise are the Ducks and just how they've had such a big turnaround. I thought some of the acquisitions they had in the offseason were kind of lackluster, but I was surprised actually at the deadline to see them add someone like a John Carlson, of course, just because a big Washington Capitals stalwart. I have a lot of friends because, again, I'm in the basically Capitals fandom area, again, being here in Richmond, but still, I was shocked to see him go, and just again of the toll it took on Washington's locker room. But again, to me, they're a big surprise out in the West. Not to mention just even Utah still hanging around a bit too, because they were off to a little bit of a more rocky start. Edmonton, again, they're still consistent, you could say, for sure, but not as big of a powerhouse as they've been in the last 2 years, of course. But then, of course, you have the likely President's Trophy winning Colorado Avalanche still leading the way. But from the West and even from the East perspective too, of course, Lyss, what are some takeaways you have as things are coming down the stretch? We're nearing right around 20 games remaining in the regular season. So what do you think a lot of hockey fans have to see going forward?
Yeah, I'm not right about a lot of stuff in hockey, so whenever I am, I like to make a big deal about it. And going into this season, I was so low on the Pacific Division. I was not excited about them at all, and I feel like that's a pretty valid thing to continue to hang your hat on. I knew that there were going to be some powerhouses in the Central Division. I wasn't expecting a Quinn Hughes to Minnesota trade by any means, but that's been a pretty cool development. I wasn't expecting Colorado to be the President's Trophy favorites from basically day one coming out the gate, just not losing in regulation until freaking December. But the West has been a kind of fascinating. Don't get me wrong, the Pacific has a lot of entertaining hockey, but I wasn't expecting it to be really, really good cup contender hockey. Anaheim being at the top of their division right now is silly to me. I can't stand the fact that that's how that division looks. The Edmonton Oilers don't play meaningful hockey till game 83. They've kind of earned the privilege of having that lackluster regular season at this point because they find a way to turn on the Jets every playoffs anyway. So you can't count them out now until they're physically out because they've proven us otherwise so many times at this point. But I like Vegas more than their record shows. I know that their overtime losses are just atrocious in terms of what it does for the loser point and their position in the standings, but I actually like them as a team.
Sounds like the New York Islanders of the last few years.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so I think that the West is really interesting. I think whoever ends up in wild card 1 is probably in all right shape in terms of, who ends up topping the Pacific. Obviously, if it's the Oilers, it's one thing, but if it's Vegas or Anaheim, that's a pretty favorable, advantage considering what it could look like if you had to play anyone in the Central Division in that Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota gauntlet there. But, in response to your comments about Carlson and Quenneville and the Ducks and everything like that, I think that the Carlson acquisition reminds me a little bit of kind of what I was saying earlier in the show here about the Stanley Shen whatever thing to Buffalo, where to me, more than anything, that's Verbeek telling the team that he believes in them and that, that sort of kind of carrot that you can dangle and you're like, hey man, you guys proved it that you're winning hockey games. I don't think anyone's thinking the Anaheim Ducks are gonna, go on to win the Stanley Cup this year, but shipping on a first, say what you will, but maybe is that the best use of that asset? I'm not certain, but what that tells your group, bringing in a guy who's as storied of a player as John Carlson is, it tells them that hey man, you've proven to us that you can win hockey games here. You can win meaningful games. You can win tight games. You can win games on back-to-backs. You can, you've proven you can hang, and it's kind of like a reward for the group. So I don't mind that sort of acquisition for teams when you're bringing in a guy that, everyone's like, oh, isn't the exact perfect fit on paper or in execution, whatever. I get it. Definitely lots of questions around that, but it's more of like a moral purchase, I think, than anything else. And also, I think John Carlson does a lot in terms of how that blue line can look. But I would be shocked if anyone not named the Edmonton Oilers goes very far from the Pacific this year. Even if the Central ends up having a bit of a beatdown, I think that their teams are too talented not to come out and play some really good hockey in the next couple of rounds here. But yeah, I watch a lot of Western Conference hockey, more so than the East for sure. And it's been a really, really interesting wild card race where it's like, you have Utah, who's fun, but pretty inexperienced. And then everyone outside of Utah who's kind of in that wild card 2 hunt is kind of boring snoring to me, to be honest with you. So I'm hoping that maybe we get a San Jose Sharks kind of moral jump in, whatever, but there's no one else in that wild card too. Right now it's Seattle. I think that's in the spot there. No one really inspires me there, and it doesn't matter because they're just going to get flattened by Colorado anyway.
Which is unfortunate too, just because, again, like even just for a team like San Jose making it, I mean, like that would be one of their first playoff bursts, I feel like, since their Stanley Cup run not too long ago. I mean, granted, that's also now almost a decade ago. So now that even saying that is pretty wild, because that was, I think, one of the 2 back-to-back Pittsburgh wins as well. So, but still, like I said, seeing the Ducks up there, I feel like it's a bit of a mirage. And like you said, I also do not see them going far. But with that, we're going to transition slightly just to do our read from DraftKings Sportsbook. So, folks, excuse me, sorry. Sorry, something in my throat here. With DraftKings Sportsbook, so the fastest game on ice has gotten even faster. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, use code THPN to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Make sure that if you're looking at some of the lines on here, folks, you have the Buffalo Sabres looking at tomorrow for their odds against Washington. Let me pull that up right now, just as we have a good look. Sabres favored a modest -1.5, but -218 on the money line. So again, I'd like to see the win streak go, obviously for personal reasons for us here. But if we're looking, say, at looking to see if Winnipeg's on there, just for you Manitoba folks tuning in. So Winnipeg, they are -1.5 favored over the New York Rangers with -162 on the money line. So keep that in mind as y'all are making your bets there. But with that also, keep that in mind. Sorry, I've just had like nonsense in my throat the last like 2 hours or so. But again, keep that in mind when you're making your bets. But again, use that code THPN to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets. And if your bet wins, make sure you keep in mind the DraftKings Sportsbook. Always, the crown is yours. So gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY, or text HOPE-NY. Connecticut, call 888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org on behalf of Boot Hill Casino in Kansas. Wager tax may pass through. Apply in Illinois. 21 plus in most states. Void in Ontario. Restrictions apply. But with that, let's go ahead and resume our regularly scheduled programming. Also, I did want to apologize as we're experiencing a minor technical difficulty on our side with streaming out to our Twitter platforms. So for those tuning in, obviously, we don't have too many viewers at the moment, but at the same time, those tuning in, we appreciate that. So having some issues just getting it out over to Twitter at the moment. So I apologize to anybody watching there or not being able to watch.
A repeating issue. We're trying to get the boys are trying to get it all squared away.
Yes, we had a great time, obviously, last week with Zach Jones of the Rochester Americans joining us on there. So no issues there, but we hope that obviously gets up and running soon. But we would be remiss if we couldn't get on the NFL free agency side of things here, Lyss. So let's dive into a little bit of NFL free agency here over these last few days. So with you being a Miami Dolphins fan, maybe not somebody who covers the team, of course, we feel like got to get your take on the team, obviously, with how last season played out. I mean, credit to the Dolphins. They had the Bills number at their second game of the season when they came down to Miami. Bills looked like they wanted to sleepwalk through that entire game and overlook them. Yeah. But the way the rest of the season played out, obviously, uninspiring just because Mike McDaniel, as much as he had an opportunity to stay, he didn't have the chance to be the guy going forward. And now he is ultimately the offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers, and which is also ironic because the quarterback selected right after Tua, Justin Herbert, is now going to be the guy he's helping lead for an offense. So what are your takes on Miami as their season played out this past season, and also how they'll look going forward with now Malik Willis at the helm at quarterback?
Yeah, every other sport I just compare to hockey. I'm always kind of like, how does this work in hockey terms? And I'm like, the idea of, going into, the next Winnipeg Jets season where it's like no Scott Arniel, no Connor Hellebuyck, no Mark Scheifele. I'm like, I don't even know what this hockey team would be. Well, what are we even talking about here? So, no Tyreek, no Tua, no Mike McDaniel going into next season. I'm like, I don't have any idea what to kind of expect going into what this next little bit is going to look like. And, I'm already limited in my football acumen and all these different things, but I feel like, you get to know what sorts of things Tua is comfortable with, what sorts of plays, Mike McDaniel is more inclined to call in certain situations and things like that. I got none of that going from, we got no Tyreek, no Tua, no Mike. So I feel like it's a blank slate for this team. And I don't know if I mean that, in a kind way. Not that I have, glowing things to say about any of those key pieces that left. Mike McDaniel's the one I think the most highly of, obviously. But yeah, Malik Willis, my bad for not being just like over the moon excited about that. But yeah, it's going to be a really interesting season, I think, down in South Florida, because there's a lot of change with the core group of those players there.
I do want to ask you one follow-up, if I could. Obviously, we kind of led the show off for our Buffalo people watching. What could you tell us about Bradley Chubb? I know he was dealing with some injuries 2 years ago. He came back last season and he put up about 8.5 sacks, I want to say. But the Bills gave him a 3-year contract of I think it was about $56 million. What did you see when watching him last season? Do you think he could return to his previous form, pre-injury? Because he used to be a dominant player and a top 5 pick.
Yeah, no, he's one of those guys that it's tough because he wasn't in Miami for a super long time. And that's not the most, exciting environment for any person to go into in a particular. So I think that, the same way I was kind of speaking of Jacob Bryson kind of earlier, where it's like, I don't know if everything we saw was everything we could see. So I think that, he's still on the right side of 30. So I think that there's a little bit of time, 3 years, you have a little bit of wiggle room to get to know what the player can do for you and stuff. But yeah, I think that based on everything I knew about the player when Miami acquired him, because obviously, when that kind of came through, you're like, okay, I want to learn everything that I can about him. And I didn't feel as though we necessarily saw everything that I was hoping to see. But again, with the asterisk of this is the 2025 Miami Dolphins. So I think that, going into the Buffalo Bills locker room, I think there's definitely some potential for him to have a super awesome impact for the guys.
Awesome. Yeah, we love that. And I think one other move we wanted to talk about, well, we might as well talk about the whole division. So you had the Jets, who reacquired Geno Smith. That's pretty interesting to me. So we can talk a little bit about that. Also, the Patriots seem to be moving off of Stephon Diggs, but there's obviously some rumors going around about his, I don't know, maybe off the field issues. But they made today a pretty big signing with Romeo Doubs, the former Green Bay Packer receiver, who's really well thought of. A lot of people thought that he may be en route to Buffalo before obviously the Bills traded for DJ Moore. So when you kind of step back and just look at our division as a whole, what stands out to you about how these 4 teams so far have approached free agency? Are you seeing any type of different philosophies or timelines between obviously the Bills, who, obviously just relinquished control to the Patriots this past season? But do you see New England kind of reloading, maybe coming back to make another Super Bowl run? I know Chris Maz and I really kind of thought that they're ahead of schedule. I think most people could probably, see that, obviously with an emerging quarterback in Drake May. But how do you see, based on these early moves so far in the offseason, how kind of the balance of power in the AFC East may be shifting, if at all, heading into next season?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. That was my kind of assessment too on the Patriots, is that Granted, their route to the Super Bowl was a little bit ridiculous. I think that if they had run into any serious football teams, we might not have seen them playing in San Francisco in February.
Agreed.
But all that's to say, you can't control your schedule. You can only, control how you perform in the games you're given, and they were great. So, I'm not trying to disrespect them by any means. But yeah, I think Romeo Doubs is a really fun acquisition for them. And I think that in terms of, trying to ride this band of brothers, the power of friendship sort of vibe they got going on, moving on from Stephon Diggs, probably not the worst thing in the world for them to do. He did have a little bit of a resurgence this past season. He was a little better than personally I was expecting him to be, but I think the same could be said for a lot of the players in that team, because I don't think any of us are expecting them to see them go all the way to the Super Bowl. But I think the team that I'm most interested in, to be honest with you, based on how the last little bit has gone, is the New York Jets, just because I think that they've had a really interesting past couple of days, and, loving Brees on Twitter and all this different stuff. And I think that, quick, easy predictions, whatever you want to call it, I don't think it's going to be Miami's year. Let's be real. And I think that there's probably a chance that New York doesn't finish at the bottom of the AFC for the first time, kind of thing. So I think Buffalo is still going to be the team that I believe in the most. I understand that, there's the joke about, I don't know if you saw that tweet that was going around today. There's like, oh my gosh, there's a turtle that's over 140 years old. And someone's like, wow. And she's never seen Josh Allen win a meaningful football game. That's crazy. But,
are they wrong? Are they wrong?
I'm still a Josh Allen truther to a degree, much to my own dismay, just because I do have a ton of respect for that player. So I think the Bills are in good shape, like you said, kind of right off the top of this show. Had an interesting couple of days, but yeah, I think Miami's going to continue to find themselves in the basement here, and the New York Jets, at least I'm interested in what they're doing for once, kind of thing. So we'll see. This continues to be one of the most ridiculous divisions in football, and I'm here for it.
One thing that now Sabres fans, to kind of even tie this with the Jets and the AFC East, the Sabres as a franchise will no longer be tied with the New York Jets for the longest playoff drought. Again, chickens before they hatch, but it's looking obviously very likely. But they will no longer be having that shame prize of having the longest playoff drought in North American sports. So the Jets will have that one in spades for sure. And I think probably going into this season as well. But anyway, another thought again, I think we touched on this lightly too, of course, if not. I want to talk about the Max Crosby not trade, just because yesterday everybody saw the news. It's just like Baltimore's rescinding their offer, sending it back to the Raiders. Failed the physical, but then you see these weird pictures on Instagram from Max Crosby himself with his feet up on the plane, and then and he even
his agent too. His agent came out, said he's good. Okay,
but still, when it comes to how that played out, I mean, then the next day immediately Baltimore is like, oh yeah, we'll pay Trey Hendrickson almost the same exact contract, more or less, and I don't know. It seems like. You say what you will, of course, as far as the conspiracy theories go on this, but seems something suspicious. I feel like all of a sudden they just knew, he's going to fail his physical, and all these insiders coming out and saying they knew that he wasn't going to pass his physical. I'm like, are you sure about that? Would you have sent these first round picks over already? I mean, Lyss, what's your take on how that trade played out? I mean, because I think Baltimore, it's kind of a swing and a miss, but yes, they do ultimately get Trey Hendrickson today, but they lost out a lot on their own free agents going to other markets, because John Harbaugh going to the New York Giants probably had a big factor in that as well. I mean, a big pancake Pat Ricard went there as well, which is a big surprise, but still, what are your thoughts on how that Max Crosby trade ultimately didn't play out?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. It's one of those things that I look at everything from a hockey lens, and I'm like, how does this happen? It kind of reminds me of the Dregs reports about the Parayko and Thomas stuff, where it's like, wait, what's happening here? Is everyone on the same page? Usually I thought we were all going to be on the same page here, but clearly we're not. But I'll be honest with you, when I first saw that thing about the physical, it felt like a little bit of a cover in a way to me, where it's it could be drug related, could be meniscus related, it could be all these different things, and you never really know why exactly it's happening. But I guess the biggest thing for me is just it's no football, only soap operas, right? It's just continues to be drama. But the question around that always is, how did that impact the way the last couple of days have gone for both the Raiders and the Ravens in terms of, other decisions they made with that transaction going through in their mind. And I don't know what the last couple of days would have looked like. Maybe they would have gone a little bit differently for either team had this trade fallen apart earlier. The whole thing was interesting to me. It was really fun to kind of get the all the hockey guys' takes on it. We're sitting at the Jets game when this whole thing happened on Tuesday night, and everyone is like, "What?" And it was pretty funny to be a part of.
Nice. I do have two quick current events things. Like Chris Maz, I'm sure you want to get to what's the last segment we always do.
Our grind my gears. How could you forget that? Come on.
The notes are jacked up. I don't know.
Yes.
Anyway, technical difficulties on the notes. But two quick things, Lyss, I want to hear your opinion on this. I'm sure this is all fugazi, but I did see a pretty interesting rumor today involving a Pat Mahomes trade to the Jets.
Ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous.
I think it was 4 or 5 first.
Who in the God's name would have like a remote chance of making this happen? And like what that sounds like a very, hate to be crass with this, like that an absolute clown take right there. Why in God's name would Kansas City trade Patrick Mahomes to the New York Jets?
I know, man. I know.
The only thing I could see would be if this is a couple of years. I wish I had all my ducks in a row better, but they're leaving Arrowhead, right? In a few years, like a long ways down the road, like however many years. Like if they went like full reset mode or whatever in a few years when Mahomes is kind of out of his prime, all this different stuff. But especially after the rumors the last couple of days that Kelsey is coming back this season, it's no. Like I'm no football insider over here. I'm no football expert, but no. That's just it's not happening. Nobody thinks that's not happening.
I like to bring up like the most crazy rumors, and so we can just put them to bed. I don't know.
Well, no, it's fun. That's on Sunday on my show that I do on Winnipeg Sports Talk on Sunday mornings. I made kind of like an offhand comment about how no player in the National Hockey League is untradeable, and Connor and I kind of got after it a little bit, where it's like some play like he thinks that a guy like Backlund Celebrini is untradeable, and I think that any player is for the right package, right return, all this different stuff. But there are certain guys that you kind of put in that corner where it's like. It's just so unrealistic that, like, why are we even talking about it kind of thing?
Right.
Exactly.
Hey, Wayne Gretzky got traded multiple times. He's the best player ever. So, just saying.
So, with that, let's transition to our Grind My Gears segment, and that's brought to you by one of our day one sponsors, Larger Than Life Blooms, because size matters. So, Lyss, you know the drill. For Grind My Gears, do you want to lay some hate, anything just driving you nuts lately, or do you want to give some flowers, show some gratitude, maybe some love?
Oh man, I knew this was coming too, and I feel like I should have come prepared because it's so bad and all these different things. Like I only know how to talk about sports. It's like a problem that I kind of got going on right now. Come to me last. I'm gonna come up with something that is not sports related.
I'll step up. I actually have a sports related one. As someone with at least half Italian heritage, I'd like to give some flowers to the Italian baseball team in the WBC. Who beat the U.S. last night, although it's a little bit goofy about how some of these players, I feel like they're getting like under the table, like envelopes of money to like, just like they're playing for countries. Oh, you have like 2% of your nationality or whatever, your heritage is for this country, whatever. But it's nonetheless, they beat the U.S. yesterday. And then just a quick update. I just saw, since we've been live, Vinny Pasquantino had the first 3 homer game in the WBC history tonight for Team Italy. So they're playing with some confidence. Who knows? They gave the U.S. all they can handle and more, and maybe they're going to be the team that comes out of right field that's going to win it all. So shout out to them. It's been a great tournament.
You never know with that one. But yeah, interesting to see how the rest of that will play out. As long as nobody plays like Brazil and gets 15 walks right in a row, that was a rough way to go out for them as they were playing the U.S., of course. But for mine, I have kind of like a two-sided one, and it's funny you mentioned like untradeable versus tradable there, Lyss, because my one player, again, back to the St. Louis Blues, I want to give some flowers to. Actually, ironically, is Colton Parayko, because yes, while he did block with the no trade clause that he had as part of like his contract that he has, but it wasn't just because of any ill will towards Buffalo or the fandom or anything like that, because he came out afterwards saying like, look, man, like I have an established life here. Like it's great that Buffalo's finally back, or like something. Yeah, I mean, he's got a pretty well-established relationship, I think, with his girlfriend, who's very prominent in the area. I think that was like a business owner. I think something involved with like the pizza industry over there. But still, I forget exactly what it was. But still, like
you're onto something, though. Yeah.
Yes. But conversely, like, so again, I want to give props to Colton Parayko for that. Conversely, though, what grinds my gears, and it's been a number of years, maybe just because we're salty Sabres fans over in our neck of the woods, but no movement clauses as a whole throughout the NHL, I feel like has just been really detrimental to something like the trade deadline or free agency, because if you're a bottom feeder like the Sabres have been for so long and you're actively trying to become a better team, I just feel like overall, like it has negatively impacted how bad teams can not only stay bad, but like it's just another roadblock for them to overcome, just because so many teams have players that have full on no movement clause, or at least modified ones where they have like even up to like 10 to 16 teams. And that's been something that I feel like could come to fruition for the next collective bargaining agreement for the NHL Players Association. But still, that's something like, especially how many viewed this trade deadline this past weekend, excuse me, and how there wasn't like a ton of like major seismic moves, of course, but still a lot of the things, like, again, using the Sabres as an example, like even if Robert Thomas, like that was a trade that happened, he would have ultimately had to waive a no movement clause, because again, I've heard a lot of pundits talk about this. Like so many of these were just given out like candy. Maybe it's just to appease the player, of course, when they're signing their long-term deal, but I feel like it just negatively impacts like hockey for so many different markets and so many different teams. So for that is grinding my gears this week. So Lyss, the moment of truth, what do you have for us?
Yeah, well, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And then I guess maybe I'll make mine a two-parter, because I want to jump on yours. My second part of that is that I think no movement clauses just as a whole grind my gears. And the first one is on the side that exactly you just mentioned. But then the other side is when, you know, these are labor contracts that players and their agents negotiated with their employer, and then people get mad at them for exercising the right that they negotiated into their contract. That grinds my gears as well. When people are like, how dare this player not want to get moved? And it's like, it's Eric Andre meme shooting in the head. Like, how dare, who did this? Right. And it's like, man, like, what on earth? Like, are you also going to get mad at him for going to the bank and cashing in his paycheck that he negotiated? Like, what? This is his entire right to do this. So it makes me mad when people get mad about that sort of thing too. I think it's silly that they're being handed out as, you know, freely as they are. And I think that that's going to come to a little bit of a pause in the next. I think people are starting to see the repercussions of it. And I think we'll start to see a few less of them handed out down the stretch. But nonetheless, what grinds my gears? Daylight savings time. I am still exhausted. It is Wednesday. I don't like it. It throws me off, and so that ruined my weekend. And we only got 23 hours of International Women's Day. So come on, guys. What's up?
Oh, yeah. Bad timing.
So an extra caveat for you there for daylight savings time. Those with little kids, i.e. me, almost 5-year-old and 1-year-old adjusting to a time change. And to all the parents out there in a similar situation, good luck with the bedtimes and routines when you're trying to put one of your kids to bed and it's still daylight out and just like, why am I going to bed now? And then, no, hear you 100% loud and clear on that one, Lyss. So yes, daylight savings time would also grind my gears. So, and also as somebody who weirdly enjoys when the time goes back, when it gets dark out earlier, like I'm somebody who enjoys that for whatever odd, strange reason when it gets close to wintertime, but still, daylight savings time. Nah, that ain't it. So Lyss, it's been a little bit over an hour into the show, so we thank you for your time as always. And for those who have been tuning in, we appreciate you still sticking with us while we've had a few technical issues behind the scenes here. But Lyss, give the viewers and listeners a plug for yourself and tell us some good things you have coming down the pipeline, especially for Chell Chit Chat and his new season coming up.
Yeah, it's been busy stuff over here. So yeah, I announced just this past weekend that another season of my podcast is coming out, and I decided to go with a hyper local focus on it. So I'm talking to only, you know, women from Manitoba on the show, or not necessarily from Manitoba, that have Manitoban connections. We have a couple of different guests here and there. It's very, very fun. So it's going to be a blast. I also write a monthly newsletter. The most recent edition came out today, and I actually talked a lot about the St. Louis Blues in it. My monthly newsletter is called No Right Answer, and basically I just fight with myself for 1,500 words about anything hockey related. So today's was about the whole idea of just getting into the playoffs and whether that's a good thing to do, whether it's a bad thing to do, what the positive consequences are, what the negative consequences are, and stuff like that. It's tons of fun. I really enjoy, every type of debate in hockey, and kind of the premise of it is that it's like, the internet has made things hard. You can't be like, oh man, like what's the capital city of like Burkina Faso again? I can't forget. You just Google it. Whereas like, now it's like if someone wants to be like, hey, who's better, MJ or LeBron? You can't Google that. That's between you and God and how many beers you've had and you're fighting over the table, right? So that's kind of the inspiration behind that one. So a new edition came out today. It's free. It's fun. I have a blast doing it. And then, if you're ever interested in hearing more about the Winnipeg Jets, or hey, to be honest with you, probably more about Logan Stanley, because I never run out of things to say about that player. Every Sunday morning, I'm live on the WST YouTube channel, 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Central Time on Sunday mornings with my co-host Connor Radchak. And then if you're ever looking for anything on Winnipeg sports, just in general, the big show on WST does go live every single day from 1 to 3 p.m. Central Time on weekdays. So that's kind of where all my stuff is. I'm busy bee with everything Jets, chill chat, all things. It's all good stuff though. So happy to be busy when there's lots going on in the hockey world.
Nice.
Love to hear that, Lyss. Again, thank you so much for the time. Folks, as we're wrapping things up here, maybe have a little bit more talk on how free agency ultimately plays out, because obviously still not a ton of movement. So perhaps more to come next week when we come back. Shawnee V also making his trip to RVA this coming weekend too. I've also experienced
seeing you. Wow.
Right? Yeah, I know. Ironically, but hey, I'll be back in time.
Hanging with the girls this time.
Yes, you will. But I'll be able to also report back on what the status of Sabres Leafs was, as hopefully more Sabres fans will not be giving up those tickets to those Southern Ontario fans in there. As always, so thanks to our Texas fan for tuning in. Thanks to our viewers tuning in. And as always, let's go Buffalo. And hey, thanks Winnipeg for Logan Stanley. So Lyss will always be watching him.
Yeah, let's go Buffalo.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Take care.